Slyšíte mě? Jo, slyším.
Thank you. Yesterday we learned that we have to start on time. So welcome to the Czech Technical University in Prague. The university is one of our partners. If you need headphones, please pick up the necessary equipment so we can switch between Czech and English. Today is the second day of the conference, which the title is Information as a Weapon, Influence Operations by Authoritarian Regimes. This is a topical thing. There are several levels, political, ethical, technological, ethical, social. So I'm very happy that we are here at the Czech Technical University, and we can look at one of the perspectives, or some of the perspectives, for example, the technical perspective. I'd like to thank representatives of the Czech Technical University for organizing today's session. I'd like to thank all our participants. This is an international conference. One of our key partners is the platform of the European Memory and Conscience. This panel will be led by or chaired by Marek Mutor. He is the president of the platform, also deputy director of National Ossolinski Institute. I'd like to thank our another partner, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. We started yesterday in the Chamber of Deputies because this topic also has a political dimension, and it's 10 days before the elections. So based on what we heard yesterday, this topic should be interesting for the public. So this topic has several dimensions, and I'm very happy that the Czech Technical University happily agreed to host the second day of the conference in this beautiful venue, the rector's office of the university. I don't think that this topic can be entirely covered today and closed today. It's an ongoing topic. Tactics, infiltration, influences. It is a very cheap tool, and we must learn to understand it. This is one of the main reasons why we are here, and we want to learn how to face it and how to respond to it. It's not easy. I will speak about it in my speech. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Marek to introduce the first session.
Yes, thank you very much. Pavel Žáček is our host. So thank you again for this, and thank you for everybody who was able to help us to organize, to help to cooperate with us and to organize this conference. And I'm very grateful for these 2 days here in Prague, because we are discussing very important topic: information as a weapon, disinformation as a weapon, how to be resilient. And yesterday we learned maybe that this problem is not a new, maybe technologies are new, but the problem is not a new one. That's why today we will focus a little bit not only on present, but also on history. In this panel we want to ask ourselves, what is the meaning, what is the value of the free speech, especially in the environment of authoritarian regime, when we have a lack of democracy. What can we do? So in this panel we have special guest Julian Negle, who was in the past Eastern European correspondent for the Voice of America, especially in 80s in Czech Republic, in Poland, and in other countries. So he is a witness of this history, how to act with the speech, with the freedom of speech, with the free word. In 80s, in very difficult, crucial time, which was very important period for the later collapse of communist system in our part of Europe. Later, he was a Balkan editor at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and also, among others, chief political affairs officer at the United Nations peacemaking mission in Kosovo.
Peacekeeping.
Peacekeeping. Yes, it's better to keep the peace than to make the peace. Peacekeeping, of course. We have also, so I was starting from my left, now is Mr. Mateusz Palka, who works for National Ossolinski Institute in Wrocław, Poland. National Ossolinski Institute is one of the most important Polish libraries, also publishing house. Mr. Palka works for manuscript department, and this department deals with legacies and archives of important people for Polish history, and one of these figures is Jan Nowak-Jeziorański, who was the chief editor of Polish section of Radio Free Europe for many, many years, and Mr. Palka will present this figure, but also Ossolinski Institute and other related subjects. And last but not least, we have Pavel Žáček, Member of Parliament of Czech Republic, Chairman of the Security Committee, but also he is a historian and journalist. He was the first director of USTR, Institute for Study for Totalitarian Regimes. In Prague, he also had a seat in the Council for Czech television. And what is very important for me, he was one of the founding fathers of Platform of European Memory and Conscience. So our international NGO, which is now quite strong organization in Europe, gathering together archives, museums, research centers, and other NGOs is dealing with the totalitarian past of the Europe, especially commemorating victims of totalitarian regimes. So, thank you for presence. I see a lot of young faces, and it's very good. After our presentations, I will try to encourage you to some kind of discussion on this very important topic, because it is not a past. This is today. Freedom of speech is a very important topic for today also. So before we will see what was before present, we will start with the present. And my first request is to Pavel Žáček for his remarks on this very important topic for today. We live here in the free societies, but we feel that freedom of speech is under pressure, and this is the topic for the states which are authoritarian or semi-authoritarian in former Soviet sphere and so on and so on. But this is also a topic for our democratic societies in the context of new media, of the new technologies, and hybrid wars, which are very, let's say, popular today. So, Pavel Žáček, please share your remarks with us. And I have to excuse you, Pavel Žáček probably will have to leave for some 15 minutes during this panel, so please forgive him. Pavel Žáček, floor is yours.
Já děkuji za slovo, děkuji za tu možnost, že odběhnu, ale nebojte se, do diskuze se vrátím. Diskuzi mám rád, diskuze se nebojím.
Thank you for giving me the floor, but I will be back for the Q&A because I like Q&As. I am very happy that I see so many young faces here. I'd like to present the topic of this conference using my own experience, because I started working as a journalist when I was 20. The revolution started and I took part in the Velvet Revolution. We had a press center at our faculty. We tried to break the barrier of communist censorship. Before that, we were quite naive and wondered why there was censorship. And at the beginning of our career, censorship was cancelled. The communist regime fell, and it opened way to freedom of speech. That's our today's topic. It was a complex process, obviously. Czechoslovakia then split. But as a journalist in Students magazine, I was able to fill the space. Let's say there were journalists, communist journalists, who didn't know what to do with freedom of speech. They had their own limits. It was not because of censorship, but also because of self-censorship, because previously they had to be really focus on their responsibility, they had to censor themselves. And all of a sudden, they had all these opportunities, and we used those opportunities to the maximum. We were young, we believed we were changing the world, and we were supporting all the processes that were behind freedom of speech and rule of law. But regarding our former president, Václav Havel, he provided auspices to the whole system. And other journalists were quite surprised that sometimes we even exerted pressure when we asked for the discussions to join NATO. And when we were making fun of some of partners of some of collaborators or of Václav Havel, or we posted a picture of Václav Havel with his tongue sticking out. But then the new constitution adopted a new Czech constitution after the split of Czechoslovakia. We had experience with communism and with Nazi occupation. So in our new constitution, freedom of speech is guaranteed. It's something that, well, we drew inspiration from the US, I think, and from Western Europe, but primarily what we used was our experience with the communist regime. Now, to connect this to the present, let me say, in the 90s, despite all the problems and social transformation, when we were trying to leave that mud and we tried to transform our country into a Western country, we had to face figures of the past, these figures, these people who had self-censorship in their heads, and they kept working within some kind of limits that were defined by politicians, and they were not using the whole space provided by freedom of speech. We were there and we were producing content, but at the same time we succumbed to that vision that it was the end of history, the end of war, and that the bipolar war disintegrated and there would be peace everywhere. Russia would change, China would change maybe as well. And look where we are today after several decades. It's obvious that some liberal democratic systems are unable to create a democratic model, or formally they adopt freedom of speech. For example, Russian constitution includes freedom of speech, but there is still centralized repressive power criminalizing freedom of speech. What Putin did before the launch of the war, he destroyed free media and free-thinking politicians and the opposition, and then he started the conflict. It was pragmatic procedure, step by step. It was preparation for the conflict. And now let me go back to the Czech Republic. You know what it's like when to fight in Ukraine. In Ukraine there is free media, and on the other hand there is the authoritarian system. Formerly there is also freedom of speech. Communists used to say before '89 that we had freedom of speech. So today, thanks to the Constitution, we have freedom, and whenever we feel threatened and whenever there is a conflict online in the cyberspace, we look for tools, but we are bound by our Constitution. And it's not good to change our Constitution, and it's not easy to change it. So the Constitution should say that in case of war, censorship is acceptable. our constitution says that the censorship is actually unacceptable under any circumstances. And whenever there is war, war must be announced. When we are, for example, attacked, if the eastern wing of NATO is attacked, war must be declared. But we have also information domain, which are ahead of the legal situation and put us in conflict. We are those who are fighting this, but these domains are being used by Russia and China, non-democratic systems who almost launch conflicts. They try to attack critical infrastructure and they spread information and disinformation. They use information as a weapon to disintegrate the democratic system of society, to destroy its values, to destroy its relationship with the government. And we are trying to find or define our line of defense, because here we have absolute freedom of speech, which cannot be limited. I think we need 3/5 of Parliament and Senate to change the constitution. So this is a huge problem. One part of this world, the authoritarian regimes, used this against us. They can say that they have freedom of speech because they have eliminated all journalists who wanted to write freely, and they support war. And if we use all new technologies, social networks, compared to the past, there were no liquid media. Anyone can be a journalist, anyone can use freedom of speech, anyone can express themselves online. So today it's really difficult to find the right legal form. Security experts, army experts tell us that there are some risks. So it's really difficult to find the right model of defense, the right line of defense, which would allow us to face this offensive. And the offensive, if we are not resilient enough, if we are not ready to respond, this offensive can actually precede a kinetic attack, a real attack. So there is no limit, because we are unable to see an attack in cyberspace as an open conflict, and it's a predecessor to a real declaration of war in Europe or in the Czech Republic. And we are trying to find the right line of defense, and since we are Democrats and we respect the rule of law, we know that it's really complicated. At the same time, we have something that you should already know, that's education. You, as users of social networks and social tools that we didn't have at the time, we used to take part in demonstrations, and we used landline to say when we were going to meet. So today they say it's a miracle that actually people met on Wenceslas Square and protested against communists. At the time, the connection was completely different. Today, you all are part of one chat group, and you can receive information all at the same time. But at the same time, this can be misused against individuals and groups. So you are young people. You know how to use the advances of new technologies better than MPs. But regarding content, you have to know, and you should know, that the content is fake, that it's manipulative, that there are hidden interests behind the content that is shared online, that the aim is to influence your future, though. So this should be connected with education, technology, army, and security experts must highlight what is behind this content, what should be prevented, what should be deleted, and what security measures should be adopted. It's in the interest of society. We must face it. It's not a simple problem. It's a very complex problem. It's really difficult to treat it and address it legally. Now you can see it on European level. There are some people who misuse freedom of speech to multiply some opinions that are being addressed here at this conference, information spread by non-democratic regimes that are supposed to disintegrate our defense. But when we are trying to regulate this to protect us, you are presented as non-democratic, and I take it very personally because I had the opportunity to take part in a specific process after the Velvet Revolution, and as a young journalist I used freedom of speech to the maximum, and I even laughed at some older colleagues who were switching from communist media to free media, that they were afraid of some topics and they were afraid to write about some things, and what they were writing didn't make any sense. So I am personally linked to this process of building a democratic state and a new legal regime. We can discuss this later as well. So we must find tools to protect our democratic states. So this is our experience, and we must transfer this experience to you so that you can tackle these topics from the very beginning, so you can understand these topics from the very beginning. And let me conclude by saying that despite growing up in skepticism, I am an eternal optimist, and I must say that I will not give you, or we will not give you a safer world, but hopefully we will give you information so you can pick the right solutions. Unfortunately, it will be even more difficult for you than for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think topic, but also I would like to maybe ask you additional question about the kind of external factor, factor of this topic. We live in the free society, but we have some societies which are not free. For example, Belarus or some elsewhere. I remember when I was a very young boy, we had a radio in our house, and family gathered around to hear Radio Free Europe. And I was not allowed to do it because, you know, children are usually not discreet. But I'm convinced that thanks to this broadcast, it was very important for collapsing the communist system in our country. Now we have countries which need the same, I think. And how should we convince Western societies to pay money to invest their resources to giving the free word to others? Yes, for example, we have now the discussion in the United States about Radio Free Europe. Pay or not to pay money for the Radio Free Europe, yes? How should we, what should be our attitude to this question?
Já začnu taky osobně.
Yes, I had the same experience, personal experience. We were under the influence of the communist propaganda. There was communist radio, communist TV. There was just one opinion on everything. And then there were these islands of freedom supported by Voice of America, Radio Free Europe. And this was a situation, it was already the end of the communist regime, but nobody knew this was going to happen because despite the events in Poland, Hungary and East Germany, nobody knew how long the regime will persist in the Czech Republic. But it was really an important factor. The propaganda was an important factor that was holding the communist regime together. And as for the rumors now, it's really similar nowadays. We should be helping the opposition elements in the non-democratic countries who need change and who need our support. So this is about using soft power. Unfortunately, we are in a situation when President Trump and his administration had their own view of freedom of speech. They regard it as an absolute freedom, and they are not able to make use of the soft power that was built by their predecessors, including Radio Free Europe, which we have here in Prague. And which spreads truthful information to Belarus, to Russia, Iran and other countries, including China. So it is really important that the free world has its professionals, journalists, who are able to supply this information, which you can't find in those regimes. You can't find information about the Western countries' position about Ukraine. You can't find it in China. You can't find this information in Iran. So there has to be some alternative media which is technically accessible, and radio and internet make this possible. But there has to be will. There has to be an understanding that this is a soft power tool, and this is the way to spread the message, to make a footprint in these countries. Because most people in these countries wish to have a different life. And when you have a leader of the biggest Western country who is not able to use this tool and who's just looking for the faults, then it's really a problem. So now it's about looking for partners, looking for allies. And it is very difficult, I think, or very dangerous to just abandon these efforts. I know how much this was helpful to us. I know how important its role was. It was really important for the citizens, and actually even communists were listening to this free radio and the secret police too. And they were granting as to what they heard, but we should be systematic in our approach. Hopefully Mr. Trump will also arrive at this conclusion sooner than later.
Talked much about Radio Free Europe, and this is a time for Mr. Palka to present, I think, very important figure, not only for us Poles, but I think generally, universally important example of somebody who was actively fighting against totalitarian regimes and in favor of free speech, Jan Nowak-Jeziorański. So, Mr. Palka, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for allowing me to say a few words about Jan Nowak-Jeziorański. They say, may you live in interesting times. For some, this perverse wish became a curse and a source of personal disaster. For others, It's a chance to grapple with fate and prove one's courage, determination, will to fight, commitment to values, principles, and to common good, to truth. Few people in Polish history had the opportunity to encompass the most important dramatic events of the 20th century in their lives. One of them was Jan Nowak-Jeziorański, who not only lived during key times for Poland, but also became an active participant in and co-creator of groundbreaking events. He belonged to the first generation that after 123 years of Poland's absence from the map of Europe would grow up, live in a free country at last. Soon, however, in September 1939, after the invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany and later the Soviet Union, his generation faced the same choice faced by their predecessors: to fight for freedom or not. The answer was obvious to them, including Jan Nowak-Jeziorański: to fight. During the World War II, Jan Nowak-Jeziorański joined the Home Army and quickly became active in the Sabotage Action N, aimed to combating Nazi propaganda. He also became a renowned carrier and emissary of the Polish underground state, smuggling secret information through war-torn Europe to the West. After the war, for almost a quarter of a century, he waged the titular War in the Ether, managing the Polish section of Radio Free Europe, a primary source of information behind the Iron Curtain. He completed his third mission in the United States. Utilizing his experience gained during the war and his work at the RFE, he skillfully persuaded the US Congress, successive presidents, and members of the administration to support the democratic opposition in Poland, and then waged a long-term fight for Poland's admission to NATO. He devoted his entire life to working for a free, sovereign, democratic, and secure Poland. He waged his fight through words, both written and spoken. Towards the end of his life, he donated his entire archive, documenting his wartime, radio, and American activities, as well as the works of art he had collected, to the National Ossolinski Institute. At the beginning of the World War II, Jan Nowak-Jeziorański co-organized the Action N network in the occupied territories of Poland and the Third Reich. Within this network, the Polish underground published publications and newspapers, newsletters addressed to the Germans, effectively imitating the publications of fictitious German sabotage groups. These publications undermined German faith in the ultimate victory of the Third Reich and weakened the morale of Wehrmacht soldiers. The satirical monthly Der Klabautermann, published as a part of Action N, graphically resembled an authentic German magazine, but the drawings and articles were prepared by the Polish underground. The caricatures from these publications left no doubt that about Germans' near future. The publication Der Rote Terror featured a caricatured depiction of Stalin as a monster on the cover, and inside it, evidence of the crimes committed by German soldiers. The second, Der größte Lügner der Welt, the world's greatest liar, portrait Winston Churchill in a negative way, and inside it, it contained quotes from Adolf Hitler's speeches and writings, which discredited him in the eyes of German soldiers. As a result, the Führer became the titular world's greatest liar. Both covers were intended to lull Germans into reading the pamphlets and lull them into the state of alertness. Their content, on the other hand, was intended to cause confusion and undermine faith in Nazi propaganda. Jan Nowak-Jezerański went down in history as a courier from Warsaw. His first career mission was entrusted to him in April 1943. Disguised as a dock worker, he boarded a ship in Gdynia and, hidden in a coal hatch, reached Sweden. Subsequent missions were longer and even more dangerous. He traveled to London in complete secrecy. He smuggled secret documents of the Polish underground state, dispatches, photographs, and hidden reports hidden in carrier lockers. You can see them on the screen. In London, he spoke not only with the representatives of the Polish government in exile, but also with British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden and Prime Minister Winston Churchill. He was supposed to be like a sponge, first absorbing as much information and facts as possible in the occupied country, and then allowing them to be squeezed out in London, only to repeat the same process before returning home. His mission was to convince the British that supporting our military effort was in their best interest. During the Warsaw Uprising, he worked at the Błyskawica radio station, broadcasting daily news from Warsaw to London. After the fall of the uprising, he and his wife set off on their third career mission through Germany and Switzerland to London to provide the Allies with information about the situation in Poland. They carried photographs and documentation of the most important underground activities, copies of proclamations, posters, and military reports. They reported to the Polish authorities on the spot and at the large press conference described each day of the Warsaw Uprising in detail, becoming its first witnesses. The room was packed with journalists, representatives from Reuters, United Press International, the Associated Press, a French agency, and the entire London and provincial English press were present, from the Times to the tabloids. What do you expect? What do you have left? That was the most important question posed by a reporter from a small provincial Scottish newspaper. Free elections, Jan Nowak replied, guaranteed by the free powers, conducted under the supervision of the British and Americans present, are the only solution that would save Poland's future and independence. After the war, Nowaks were forced to remain in exile. And this marked the beginning of the second phase of Jan Nowak's career, his long-standing work at the Polish section of Radio Free Europe. RFE was founded in 1949 in New York as the media arm of the National Committee for a Free Europe. The station's mission was to broadcast to those countries that, after the war, found themselves in the Soviet Union's sphere of influence and locked sovereignty of free media. Jan Nowak-Jezerański served as the director of RFE Polish section based in Munich from 1952 to 1975. On May 1952, transmitters positioned near Lisbon via several antennas in West Germany, transmitted the RFE audio signal to Poland for the first time, along with the message. This is Radio Free Europe, voice of free Poland. Attention, attention. These are Poles speaking to Poles. Nowak Jeziorański announced, the Polish team gathered around the microphone today consists of people with diverse beliefs and political views. But we are all united by this wonderful collusion which comes from striving for one common goal. We will tell you the truth about the events unfolding around the world which the Soviet regime wants to hide from you, to kill any remnants of hope within you. We will inform you about the Polish activities in the international arena. We will wage a live-air battle against the Sovietization and Russification of Polish culture, a fight against the denationalization of the youth. We will fight the falsification of our history and our traditions. We will present to you independent Polish political thought, which was stifled in a subjugated country, but continues to develop freely in conditions of freedom. We will speak loud what Polish society cannot say out loud because it's gagged. For millions of Poles, RFE was a primary source of information unavailable in the censorship-controlled media, although the communist authorities did everything possible to discourage it. Broadcasts were jammed by devices deployed throughout the country, and party propaganda attempted to convince listeners that the station was the product of American German fascism. The radio informed Poles about events in the country that party propaganda attempted to conceal. In July 1955, the station began broadcasting a list of labor camps in the Soviet Union where Poles were imprisoned. Soon, the release of political prisoners and the so-called second wave of repatriations began, effectively deporting thousands more Poles from the eastern borderlands. In the spring of 1956, RFE published the text of a secret report by the Secretary General of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, exposing Stalinist crimes. In June, the radio reported on the brutal suppression of the workers' demonstrations in Poznań. In October 1956, it supported Władysław Gomułka, who was returning to power in Poland. In 1964, RFE broadcast Letter 34. It was a protest by intellectuals against communist censorship. A year later, the station defended the Polish episcopate, which was attacked for its letter to German bishops, with the famous words, "We grant forgiveness and we ask for forgiveness." In 1968, RFE interrupted its broadcasts to report of the invasion of Warsaw Pact troops into Czechoslovakia. In December 1970, RFE was the first to report on the massacre of the workers on the coast. For over 30 years, the security service fought RFE, recruiting agents from among the radio's employees and placing their own agents in the editorial office. RFE's daily life involved balancing the radio's mission, the expectations of the political diverse and internally conflicted team, and the pressure from Americans who wanted to turn the radio into a tool of their own politics, which did not necessarily align with the interests of national sections. The first serious conflict with RFE's American management occurred in 1958. The serious conflict with RFE's American management, the station supported the Polish People's Republic policy regarding the Polish-German border on Oder-Neisse line, while the Americans preferred a state of temporary nature. They wanted programs submitted to a special established program analysis office before broadcast, which the station's team considered a censorship. The Americans relented only before the threat of a strike. In 1972, Senator William Fulbright demanded the closure of RFE as a relic of a Cold War. In 1975, in protest against RFE budget cuts and employee layoffs, Nowak Jezerański resigned as a director. Among his most important achievements was consistently managing the Polish radio station's programming, adhering to the iron principle of separating fact from the opinion. Jan Nowak's resistance to mobilize Polish listeners for a mass-armed rebellion against the government stemmed from his dramatic wartime experiences, including the tragedy of the Warsaw Uprising. He advocated deregulating the communist system through minor changes. He believed that the mobilizing social pressure on the government, one could, without resorting to violence, expand the margin of freedom. One of the most spectacular information campaigns representing a fight against censorship in the Polish People's Republic was the series of events surrounding Józef Światło, a high-ranking communist official in the Ministry of Public Service, who in December 1953 defected to the West and testified about his activities to the CIA. The secrets revealed were shocking. He told the truth about pervasive corruption and the oligarchization of power, political prisoners, kangaroo courts, rigged elections, the destruction of civil liberties, political assassinations, and show trials. Nowak Jezerański was well aware of the ideologically and morally complex nature of handing over the testimony of such compromised figure to Poles, but he also believed that the runaway should be used as widely as possible, as his knowledge was priceless. Thanks to the materials acquired in Washington, RFE began broadcasting the program behind the scenes of the security service and the party. A total of 141 broadcasts were transmitted between 1954 to 1955. As a result, some political prisoners were granted amnesty and the security service was purged. Światło's revelations proved shocking, but the effectiveness of his broadcast depended on the availability in Poland. It was banned, haunted by the police, and jammed. When the party realized how compromising Światło's testimony was for his highest authorities, the jammers began to work with increased power. Nowak Jezerański was aware of the potential of the obtained material. From his own experience and secret work during the war, he knew perfectly well the power of skillfully used information. A dozen or so years later, this experience proved priceless. Therefore, he did everything possible to use the acquired material on the air as widely as possible, but then began searching for the way to reach Poles who did not have access to RFE broadcasts. Thus, the idea of sending brochures with Światło's revelations to Poland via balloons was born. The Americans wanted to codename the operation Truth, but agreed to Nowak's proposal to call it Spotlight, corresponding to the name of the author of the revelation, Światło. This was not the first balloon operation by the Free Europe Committee. It had rehearsed earlier on two other national RFE stations, Czechoslovak and Hungarian. Operation Prospero began on July 1953. Several types of leaflets were dropped over Czechoslovakia. The first looked like a banknote with the inscription "Crown of Misery, a gift from the Soviet Union," and the text, "Czechs and Slovaks, remember, the regime is weaker than you think. Strength is the people. Base your strength on courage and unity. Down with collectivism. Demand your rights. Demand concessions today and freedom tomorrow." The second exposed the political conflicts in Moscow after Stalin's death, while the third carried the slogan, "All Czechs and Slovaks for freedom. The whole free world stands with Czechs and Slovaks." The second operation was codenamed Veto. It was launched on May 1st, 1954, and was much larger in scale. The anti-government leaflets were signed by the voice of the people's opposition, the supposed opposition in Czechoslovakia. Millions of the group's ballot papers were dropped just before the elections. The leaflets were broadcast simultaneously over the radio. Jan Nowak saw in Operation Veto a clear resemblance to the methods of the warfare against the Germans, in which he participated during the war. The third balloon operation took place on October 1st, 1945, in Hungary. Under the name Focus, the operation carried out leaflet drops containing political and economic programs prepared for the country by the supposed opposition. Nowak-Jeziorski appreciated the effectiveness of the actions, but the ability to reach people, on the lack of significant risk involved. The number of leaflets and brochures were so large that it didn't result in a significant wave of repression against readers. Nevertheless, he wasn't convinced of carrying out similar actions in Poland. They were effective, but disproportionate to the West's passivity during, for example, the bloodily suppressed anti-communist uprising in Berlin in June 1953 by the Red Army. He also resented the impersonation of a supposedly existing organization and the incitement to rebellion, which could have ended in bloodshed. He opposed RFE's creation of political programs. He didn't want Americans to decide on their shape. The most important thing is the facts we are to convey to Poland. We should wait for some event that will fill this new medium with meaningful content, he said. This moment came with the Polish People's Republic authorities intensified their jamming of RFE programs after the revelation of Światło. Nowak-Jeziorski insisted that the brochures sent would contain only Józef Światło's testimony and not the political program or instructions for combating with regime planned by the Americans. He also made it clear that the balloon operation would not result in repression only if its scale was large and widespread. He also set a condition that the operation should be a one-time operation and Światło's political role should end after he really revealed the truth about the regime. He also proposed that the brochures be printed in Munich, which would simplify the logistics of the entire undertaking. He also wanted to prevent the inclusion of additional programmatic content in the brochure. His demands were met. The operation Spotlight balloons soared on an altitude 12,000 meters. Each balloon was attached to a box containing a payload of leaflets, which, behind a partition, contained a weight-adjusted piece of dry ice. As the ice sublimated, the box with the pamphlets inverted, spilling its contents over the destination. You can see some photos of this, of the logistics of the operation here. The Ossolinski National Institute. The Ossolinski National Institute is not only a place where priceless collections and vast archives, such as those of Jan Nowak-Jezerański, are stored, analyzed and made available to researchers and readers. Jan Nowak's person and work are also a constant source of inspiration and analysis, for example, in our publishing activities. Every year since 2004, the Ossolineum has awarded the Jan Nowak-Jezerański Prize to a person or institution demonstrating thinking about the state as a common good. The ceremony takes place on June 4th, the day commemorating the first parliamentary parliamentary elections in Poland after the World War in 1989. The Ossolineum also organizes exhibitions, temporary and permanent. In 2016, the Pan Tadeusz Museum in Ossolineum opened a permanent exhibition, Mission Poland, based on collections donated to the Ossolineum by Jan Nowak-Jezerański and Władysław Bartoszewski. The exhibition tells the story of Poland from the outbreak of World War II, the period of the Polish People's Republic, to the political transformation and the recent years, including its accession to NATO and European Union. The Pan Tadeusz Museum is therefore a long and complex story of Poland's path to independence. The Ossolineum is also a vibrant place for reflection on the past and where history meets modernity, and the experience and steadfast stance of our donor become a starting point for reflection and attitudes toward the challenges of today. It is up to us to determine what lessons we draw from history. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm working for, I have been worked for Ossolinski Institute for 3 last years, and yes, I can confirm that this is a very special place. This is only one of the histories. This is the place which deal with the history of Central Europe and a deep history of the Central Europe. But according to Jan Nowak-Jezerański, I think that this is the historical perspective for the figure, and we can learn from this figure the kind of civil courage, the kind of attitude to the reality, what all of this, what Václav Havel called power of powerless. So single person who was able to do extraordinary things, and I think that personally he delivered, or he dedicated, he done a lot for this process of collapse of communist system in Poland. So thank you for this perspective, historical perspective, and now we have the witness. We have Julian Negle, who served for the free speech. So please share your experience, especially from 80s, which were, I think, crucial years for us in this part of Europe.
Thank you, Marek. Indeed, I am not a historian, but as luck would have it, I was repeatedly a witness to history. I was hired by Voice of America in 1984, and after 2 months of training in Washington, I returned to Vienna, where I'd been living for nearly 4 years by then. There were two big stories that had just broken shortly before I arrived, at the beginning of November of 1984, the kidnapping and murder by 3 Polish state security officers of Solidarity priest Jerzy Popiełuszko, and the murder of a Czech railway worker, Franciszek Faktor, near České Velenice, by Czechoslovak border guards, who chased Faktor in the early afternoon, in other words, in broad daylight, 400 meters onto sovereign Austrian territory, leaving him to bleed to death from multiple gunshot wounds to his chest. His body was only discovered 1 week later. As a young reporter, I found both of these state-sanctioned murders abhorrent and deserving of focus and context, not only for target audiences in Poland and Czechoslovakia, but where local media either ignored them or presented only the state's version in very limited doses, but also for VOA's worldwide audience, which numbered at the time some 120 million people worldwide outside of the United States, where VOA was not allowed to broadcast. Both cases were opportunities to focus on ongoing police brutality and lawlessness in Soviet satellite states. My first trip outside of Austria for VOA was to report from the preparatory conference of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe's Budapest Cultural Forum. Here, for the first time, I encountered a boorish senior Soviet official, a deputy culture minister, who, when I posed a question at his news conference, he launched into a diatribe against VOA, revealing the Soviet regime's intense dislike of Western broadcasts in the languages of the USSR. After the news conference, a reporter from the British Communist Morning Star came up to me for my reaction. I declined to give him a quote, so the following day the headline in the Morning Star was, "Voice of America falls silent." After months of pressure by the US Embassy in Prague, as Ambassador William Lures demanded that the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs grant the VOA correspondent permanent journalistic accreditation. It wasn't about me. They'd started already with my predecessor. As a matter of reciprocity, if they don't give me accreditation, then the Czechoslovak radio correspondent in New York covering the United Nations primarily would face limitations on his freedom of movement. And I have it in writing. It was 30 miles, 50 kilometers from Manhattan. That convinced the Central Committee and the Foreign Ministry to be more accommodating. I mean, let me add here, it's not in my text, VOA was also jammed, but only until 1973. Richard Nixon sent his his Secretary of State, William Rogers, to Prague in early '73, and Husak and Strogal were sufficiently pleased to have a senior American official here that they agreed to cease jamming VOA. RFE was a different kettle of fish. VOA was perceived as the official radio station of the United States abroad, and so it had a different degree of respect. RFE-RL was beyond the pale in Prague's view, almost until the very end of the communist regime. I was notified in March 1985 that I should come to Prague to fetch my accreditation booklet at the Foreign Ministry. The head of the press department, Ambassador Soukup, informed me that my accreditation would be a new experience for all concerned, and hence would be for a trial period. His deputy and STB, State Security collaborator, took a stronger tone, informing me that my reports on Czechoslovakia would be carefully assessed, adding, "You can write whatever you want, just don't insult, nadávat, our system." A report in my Czechoslovak counterintelligence file assesses my stories individually in 3 categories as positive, neutral, or negative for the first 6 months, I think, of my accreditation. I would add here, one STB informer in the press department at the Foreign Ministry characterized me as a dangerous person because it was not immediately apparent to Czechs that I was from the West, that I was, as they put it, a hard currency foreigner. Upon exiting the Foreign Ministry, the Chernin Palace, in blowing snow in March 1985, and irritated by the veiled threats at the ministry, I spontaneously decided that I needed to make a point, that I would be the one to decide what I write about and who I write about, who I interview. And so a few minutes later, I rang the doorbell at the Archbishop's Palace to request an interview with then 85-year-old Cardinal František Tomášek. I introduced myself to the gatekeeper, who told me I could ask the Cardinal myself as he was just arriving by car. I went up to his car, and as he got out, I started to explain who I was, but he gruffly responded, "Květsi, get to the point. I want to interview you for Voice of America. Come here tomorrow at 10. I already have an interview scheduled with Reuters. You can join them." Tomášek had two things on his mind: constant pressure from the constant pressure and interference from the head of the State Office for Church Affairs, Janku, and preparations for the Velehrad pilgrimage in early July 1985, marking the 1100th anniversary of the arrival of Saints Cyril and Methodius in Moravia, and thereby of Christianity in the region. Tomášek said his intention was to achieve an awakening, povzbuzení, of Czechoslovak Christians. The communist authorities sought to hijack the event at the last minute and present it as a gathering for peace, mírové shromáždění, with the Czech culture minister Milan Klusák, who had already blocked Tomášek's invitation to Pope John Paul II to attend the pilgrimage, as well as the Slovak culture minister, Miroslav Válek, and district officials addressing a crowd of tens of thousands of Czech and Slovak Catholics. And they had put up on the walls doves of peace and the word peace in multiple languages, as if this was just your standard communist youth festival or something. And when the crowd heard them use the phrase peace assembly, mirové shromáždění, they started whistling. 10,000 or more, tens of thousands of Czechs and Slovaks whistling and jeering communist officials in 1985 was unthinkable, unheard of. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was there. I had my microphone, my tape recorder on. And as soon as it was over, I got in the car, drove back to Vienna, and sent the recording, and filed my story, and it was all broadcast back that evening to Czechoslovakia and worldwide. And here I'll interject. Technology has changed a lot in 40 years. There were no mobile phones. Radio reporters didn't have satellite dishes. And there was an iron curtain one had to get through. And always the danger that border guards on this side of the border would ask, well, what do you have? And go through it. I never had my tape confiscated, but there was an instance in May '89 when I was sitting at the border in the evening, having interviewed Havel earlier that day, and I wanted to get the story out, and unlike other instances where I kept the cassette in my pocket until I got to Vienna, I sent it from Prague on this occasion because it was a very hot story. Havel had been in prison for 4 months. And at the border guard said to me, "Have you heard Havel has been released?" And I said, "Yeah, I know. I interviewed him. Do you have the recording with you?" I said, "Actually, I've just been listening to it on the radio." And he was so crestfallen. He thought he was going to get a bonus. Anyway. After Velehrad, in the following weeks and months, I was told by several people in Czechoslovakia, including STB collaborators, but not only, that I had no idea how much of an impact my reports on VOA from Czechoslovakia were having. Netušíš, jako máš moc, I was told repeatedly. I was dubious until I wrote a think piece inspired by a conversation I had with my colleague and mentor, VOA's Czechoslovak service correspondent in Vienna, Ivan Medek, about the president and Communist Party chief Gustav Husák's fear of the word reform. A political dictionary published by the regime, Stručný politický slovník, defined the word reform as, in politics, a partial concession by the ruling class to the downtrodden classes through a political change which the ruling exploitative class brings about so as to hold on to power and maintain its domination. Reforms, however, never reach the base, the essence of the social system. I will repeat this in Czech for effect. V politice jde o dílčí ústupek vládnoucí třídy potlačovaným třídám, politickou změnu, kterou uskutečňuje vládnoucí vykořisťovatelská třída, aby udržela svou moc své panství. Reformy se však nikdy nedotýkají základů, podstaty společenského zřízení. This is dialectic goulash. This is a definition of reform. This is the definition of the complete incompetence of the communist regime in the 1980s. Days later, Gustav Husák addressed a plenary session of the Communist Party Central Committee in the Spanish Hall at Prague Castle and remarked that there are reports, hlasy se, a play on words with the Czech word for voice. Hlasy said that Husák was afraid of the word reform, which he denied, and proceeded to use the word repeatedly in his speech in a positive sense. There's no doubt in my mind that Husak's remarks about reform were a reaction to my think piece about his fear of reform. Of course, the Czechoslovak regime's policy barely changed thereafter, nominally following, albeit with delays and without significant policy changes, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev's policies of glasnost and perestroika. But it was clear to me that the regime was listening, and not only in the Foreign Ministry's press department, and they felt pressed to respond. Thanks to Ivan Medek, who showed up at the VOA bureau in Vienna's Gunoldstrasse every weekday afternoon at 4 to record his contribution to that evening's broadcast, I had a wealth of material from Charter 77, which he supplied me with, and from his other independent sources. He provided me with names and addresses of dissident activists whom I then visited in Prague and elsewhere. When I finally arranged an interview with Václav Havel, my first of many, the persecuted dissident playwright was more nervous than I was, and he told me that he would have to choose his words very carefully so as not to end up back in jail where he had spent years suffering considerable damage to his health. I subsequently interviewed him on numerous occasions in his flat and once at his cottage at Hradeček, when on one occasion his wife Olga met me at the door of their Prague flat and told me that Vácek had no time to receive me. Havel's voice boomed from the living room. Olga, who's there? It's Mr. Nagely from Voice of America. Within seconds, Havel was ushering me into his living room, saying that VOA was important and not to be turned away. He was also one of the few dissidents whom I recall having suggested improvements in VOA's Czechoslovak broadcast. Specifically, he wanted more government editorials and less of what he called hit parade pop music, which, however, was a staple for a broad segment of listeners. He also suggested a better segmentation of programming so that the politically significant items were up front and not scattered throughout the program on the grounds that he didn't have time to listen to the whole broadcast. I countered that the editorials were controversial, having been instituted by the Reagan administration's USIA, U.S. Information Agency Director Charles Wick, and in my view, were not entirely in line with the VOA Charter, which called on VOA to represent the full spectrum of U.S. public opinion, not to be a government mouthpiece. Havel told me he needed to know what the thinking was in Washington. In retrospect, with the departure of Ambassador William Lures from the U.S. Embassy in Prague 1986, Havel had lost a highly trustworthy and reliable source of information, and explanations of U.S. foreign policy were not duplicated by either of his successors, Ambassadors Julian Němčík and Shirley Temple Black. Thus, short of occasional visits by U.S. congressional delegations whose members sought out Havel, perhaps the next best source of accessible information on Washington's thinking was the Voice of America, the government editorials, but also translations of key newspaper editorials. I was reported on during my time in Czechoslovakia in the 1980s by a host of STB informers, for some of whom it was part of their job description. If they were hotel employees or government bureaucrats, that was to be understood. However, many other informers were among my best sources, friends and acquaintances, and many of them told me when they were being asked to inform on me. What surprised me when I gained access to my secret police file, counterintelligence file, in the mid-1990s was not so much who collaborated, but rather the depths to which they went in their collaboration, in frequent, detailed reports, and in some cases being paid generously every month for the information they passed on about me. I had circumstantial evidence of fear within the security apparatus. When a friend was questioned about me by the secret police in Brno in September 1986, their parting words of warning were, "We don't want to hear about our discussion this evening at 9, the time that VOA had its main broadcast in Czech and Slovak. Similarly, when a customs officer at Hatě u Znojma for several hours, kept me waiting for several hours at the border in January 1989 on my way into Czechoslovakia, insisting that I hand over a paperback biography of Jan Palach by Jiří Lederer that I had in my bag, I desisted, holding my ground by citing the Helsinki Accords and subsequent documents that basically required the signatory states to respect the right of journalists to conduct their business, including the materials they needed to function. And it was the 20th anniversary of Palach's self-immolation, and this was a source book for me. After several phone calls to Prague, the customs officer said to me, "Fine, you can take the book to Prague, but for God's sake, don't show it to anyone and be sure you have it with you on your way out." I recounted the story that evening to Havel, and he expressed optimism that change was coming. Yet 2 days later, he was jailed and subsequently after trying to place flowers at the site of Palach's self-immolation on Wenceslas Square, which the regime described as pobuřování, incitement. I didn't see him for 4 months. I mentioned earlier that I interviewed him the day he was released, and he told me that even while in prison, he sensed that change was approaching, that there was a different atmosphere from when he had gone into prison in January. Conscious attempts in the Soviet bloc either to intimidate me beyond mere surveillance or else to block me from sending my news reports over the years were fairly infrequent and were generally linked to a particular issue or event that a given regime felt uncomfortable about being in the spotlight at a particular moment, such as when I was detained for the first time in the cemetery in Kralupy during Nobel laureate Jaroslav Seifert's funeral in 1986. And I was accused of having a bomb in my equipment bag. Not that they ever opened it. The secret police officer kept it on his lap in the front of the car. And there was a diplomatic protest, of course. When I tried to send my story, I was told by the hotel telephone operator, an STB informer, that she was unable to connect me with London or Washington. Similarly, upon my return to Sofia, Bulgaria in 1985 from an expedition to visit members of the country's Turkish minority community, during which I'd been detained for several hours in Momcilgrad in the south of the country, it proved impossible to phone Washington from my hotel in Sofia. Also from the Central Post Office telephone exchange, and from the home of a US diplomat. It was a Sunday. US Ambassador Melvin Levitsky kindly allowed me to telex my story. Telex, for those of you under the age of 50, was before the internet, you typed out on a long tape a piece of correspondence, a story or whatever, and then you fed it through and you went to an address where there was also another big telex machine. These were very big, very noisy teleprinters back in the 70s and 80s. The telex in the US ambassador office in Sofia was also blocked repeatedly when sent. The line simply went dead. The ambassador then offered to send me, this was Ambassador Melvin Levitsky, he offered to send me my story as a diplomatic cable, to which I said yes, as long as he would do the same thing for any other US reporter. The cable was sent without instructions, but it was duly forwarded to the VOA newsroom. When I woke up the next morning and tuned into VOA News, the first two stories were about natural disasters in Pakistan and Bangladesh, and the third story was about my brief detention in Bulgaria, to which I took exception, after arguing it should have been much further down in the lineup. I was detained twice again later that week in Shumen and Tolbuchin, known as Dobrich, on the grounds that my presence there was not in the state's interest, both places having members of the Turkish community. Developments in Moscow were developing in a relatively positive direction, so much so that a group of Prague-based Soviet journalists invited me, the VOA correspondent, for an eye-opening chat in a flat up the street from the Soviet embassy. They told me that they had been dreaming for years of being sent abroad to work and getting out of the endless stagnation of Soviet life. But now that they had been in Prague for a while, where nothing, in their view, was happening, while Moscow was in a state of fermentation, they just wanted to be able to go back to Moscow and experience the changes under Gorbachev's policies. In fact, I was dubious that glasnost and perestroika were being implemented much beyond Moscow and Leningrad. I requested and was granted a Soviet visa to visit the Soviet republics of Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan. I was accompanied by the head of VOA's Russian language service and a minder from Gosteleradio. Our visit in early 1988 was the first reporting trip by VOA to the USSR, not accompanying a senior US official. Not surprisingly, glasnost and perestroika were little more than terms that were not borne out by policies being implemented. What we did find was the omnipresence of the KGB in Georgia, which resulted in my complaining when a Georgia TV crew suddenly turned up unannounced to ask us about our impressions of Tbilisi. I responded that they indeed have a beautiful city, but that we'd have a much better impression if we weren't constantly surrounded by a phalanx of intrusive KGB officers. Our minder later suggested that I watch my words, and I suggested that they not be so overbearing and let us do our legitimate job reporting. Our next stop was Yerevan, where security proved so lax that a leading local Armenian dissident, Parvir Ayrikyan, whom I'd intended to interview about the explosive situation in the then Armenian majority enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijan, showed up at my hotel room door and gave me an interview. Usually you'd have to go out and get one. He came, there was no police around. Armenia was functioning in a completely different world from the rest of the Caucasus. A couple of months later, when Yerevan Central Square was jammed full of demonstrators, and Ayrikyan was speaking to me by phone in Vienna, he addressed the crowd from a window of the Central Post Office, held the phone out the window, telling the crowd he had VOA on the line, and the crowd roared its approval. This goes on a bit, and I've been told to keep mine short. I would just say that by chance, I was accompanying West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl on an official visit to Poland when the Berlin Wall was breached. I was in East Berlin at my boss's insistence on November 17th, when I knew my place that day was in Prague, which I only reached 2 days later. Regrettably, there is insufficient time today to repeat my account of November 1989, which is available elsewhere. I would sum up VOA's substantial role in informing Czechoslovaks as having been largely overtaken in the early days of the Velvet Revolution when Czechoslovak state television began live or nearly live broadcasts from a cherry picker in Wenceslas Square on November 22nd. I could not seriously compete with live video. When on December 10th, at the conclusion of a televised news conference by the newly installed Prime Minister Marian Chalfa at the Intercontinental Hotel, his spokesman Miroslav Pavel gave me the floor with the words, "The last word belongs to the Voice of America." On my way back to my hotel, several total strangers who until then had only known my voice from the radio waves and had no idea how I looked, having just seen the news conference on TV, came up to me on the street and thanked me or waved from a distance. I was barely at the halfway mark of my decade with VOA. The next weeks, months, and years were marked by covering Havel's inauguration, his first trips to East and West Germany, the US and the USSR, the end of Albania's self-imposed isolation, the violent breakups of Yugoslavia and the USSR, Czechoslovakia's so-called velvet divorce, and massive movements of refugees and internally displaced persons. The Trump administration's announcement on March 15th of this year of its intention to end US international broadcasting, including by VOA, was a gut punch that reeks at the very minimum of pandering to Moscow, Beijing, Pyongyang, and Tehran, while preventing audiences from continuing to access reliable news in audiences in closed society dictatorships everywhere from being able to access reliable news.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for this testimony, actually, and for all your involvement. I think that thanks to people like you, we have now freedom. Now it's obvious for us that we can, for example, discuss on almost every topic. But there were times, and there are still in some parts of our world, that people cannot discuss. People have no access to information, have no access to knowledge, and they cannot say, for example, that they don't like government because they will go to prison, or they cannot say that something is going bad in their country because they will go to prison. So in this situation, there is necessary to have somebody who will do it in their name. And this is also the function of the free media from abroad, who wants to help societies which are under the pressure of authoritarian regimes to survive, to have access to information and to tell in their names what is going on in their countries. So I open the discussion. Maybe you have some reactions. There is a microphone. Peter. Okay. We should continue with the next panel. But maybe after the second panel, we can have a closing discussion. Short one, very short one, and then the next panel.
Yeah, so
Commentary or a question.
My name is Thomas Pevny, and I'm really grateful for all three talks that I heard, or four. And what I realized is that maybe the radio is not dead, right? Because the radio waves are very difficult to block. Like, we can have a jamming, but if you look at the internet, and internet is filtered in many countries, whereas the radio is difficult to block.
Yeah.
But so I would like to kind of, ask you if you're still saying that the radio has its place precisely because of this.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this argument a lot since March. The simple answer is Voice of America and Radio Free Europe generally, overwhelmingly, are using satellite, internet. Yeah. It's not people listening to radios as they were.
So Radio Free Europe is not radio anymore.
It's all online. It's all online, so that's not an issue.
Okay. Problems are old, technologies are new, so I encourage you to think about freedom of speech, to see the world around you, and to think how to help people who don't have access to the freedom of speech. So now, as Peter ordered, we have to pass on to the next panel. So my role is over now, and we are waiting for the new panelist. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tak děkujeme. My teďka uděláme jenom krátkou.
Thank you. We shall now have just a very short technical pause. We need to change the headsets for the speakers. If you want, you can take your refreshments to your seats, and then we will continue. Hopefully there will be then some time for questions.
Teď by mělo být 5. Tak já bych vás ráda poprosila, jestli byste mohli zaujmout.
Ladies and gentlemen, kindly be seated. And I would pass the floor to Mr. Schmid, who will host this panel. Because we have now this final panel and we will hear the panelists. Thank you.
Takže dobrý den.
Good morning. My name is Jaroslav Schmid and I have the honor to host this panel titled National Security in the Context of New Technologies. Therefore, I'm very happy to see young faces here because young technologies are mostly used by the youth. And we will now be talking about how they can be used for ensuring national security and other challenges posed. We are going also to talk about the challenges posed by these new technologies. Talking about new technologies, we mostly refer to artificial intelligence and quantum computing. These two things go hand in hand and they are developing very quickly lately. That is why they are ever more used in the area which is the topic of this conference, the information war. Some of you have been at this conference also yesterday, and we spoke about how the information war and information campaigns were conducted in the past. But our task here today is to talk about how are they conducted today with the use of new technologies. Unfortunately, Jan Kavalírek could not attend this panel. He is from the Ministry of Economy and he is the main person who is in charge for the use of artificial intelligence in the state. Information technologies, the leading technology in the information war is artificial intelligence. China, already back in 2017, as one of the main players, published a plan according to which by 2030 it wants to be the leader in the development of artificial intelligence. In the same year, in September, Russian President Putin said that artificial intelligence brings many opportunities and also threats which are hard to predict. And the leader in artificial intelligence will be the leader of the world. And I believe that these words are alarming, because they are said by Putin, and we should really think about artificial intelligence and how to use it, because it is being used for disinformation purposes in disinformation campaigns. Now, we are shortly before the election here in the Czech Republic, so it is being deployed to influence people before they cast their vote. And all of that, thanks to artificial intelligence, is done much more efficiently. As Mr. Žáček said at the beginning of today, before you had to use landline, and it took a long time before you could agree on something, but today you just click a couple of times and you can call a huge community of people to do something. I want to avoid talking much about the implementation of artificial intelligence into military activities. Rather, I would prefer if we home in on other areas, such as the security of critical infrastructure, education, etc. Permit me now to present the panelists. From the Academy of Sciences, we have Alžběta Solarčík-Krausová from the Institute of State and Law. Good morning. Another representative of academic sphere is Tomáš Pevný. Hello. Then we have Luděk Michálek from the state administration. He is the director of the Department of Security Research and Police Education at the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Hello. And next to me, the fourth panelist, very well known, Mr. Aleš Špidla from the Severo Institute. Now, I would like to start by asking each of the panelists, how do they perceive state security? It could mean different things for each of you, and you have, I'm sure, your perspective. So I would like to ask the panelists, what is their perception of this term in the context of implementation of artificial intelligence? So I would start with you, Luděk, because maybe you are the one most involved in this area.
Thank you. As it has already been said, I am the director of the Department of Security Research and Police Education and the Ministry of Interior. In the past, I worked for the army and I also teach at a university, so I do many various activities. National security, I see this and understand this term. Linguistically, sometimes we have a problem with it, but it's actually the equivalent of state security. Here in the Czech Republic and in Poland as well, we have Polish colleague here. It's a bit pejorative, this term, state security, because the body was called like this in the past, the police body. But this term came here from the US, where nation, state, federal, national security, actually that's the same. National security means providing or making sure that the state is protected. The state as such is protected against external threats, which we will not cover today, as was already mentioned, but inner threats as well, such as subversion, extremism, and a sophisticated organized crime, which can threaten the state as well. So I believe that it is a really vast term, and here the Ministry of Interior is directly involved, and our department It focuses on internal security, so we do, this is what we do, and we also educate the police. It is a really vast term, and it applies to all security services, firefighters, the police, and customs officers who make sure that the state remains stable, and make sure that there is integrity within the state, that its inhabitants, citizens are protected against threats and risks which they can protect them against. And firefighters also protect us against environmental threats, but I mean mostly anthropogenous threats, something which is devised by people or state actors. Thank you. Now I'd like to give the floor to Aleš, because he also worked during his career at the Ministry of Interior, and he drafted our first national cybernetic security strategy. So this topic is close to his heart. As my colleague said, I think it was quite telling, and I would just like to say that the national security layers. Yesterday we had sessions mainly about information and disinformation. This is closely related to state security, because disinformation actors primarily want to destabilize society, and destabilized society is closely related to national security. I was introduced as someone who has been active within the area of cybernetic security, and tools. These destabilizing tools are mainly used online and on social networks. The disinformation actors are most active online, and this session is also about education. We must educate people and share the truth, because this makes society more resilient towards disinformation. Society will then not believe everything that appears online on social media. Whatever I write online on social media, it might be stupid, it might be nonsense, but if it gets 250 likes, it becomes the truth. And you can find scientific evidence for anything, for example, that the Earth is flat. So we have to make society more resilient towards against disinformation using education. We must share the truth. We must share truthful information, and we must strengthen trust in public authorities and other bodies that provide information to society, so that it is not destabilized. Society will always have multiple opinions. We don't want society to have one opinion, but for my opinion, I need relevant information. And if I don't have relevant information, it's just a guess, just a speculation. An opinion must be based on information. And today, social networks, social media are based on emotions. These emotions are assessed by algorithms. These algorithms create the right bubble for you, so that you are supported in your speculations. And the fight between argument and emotions, well, this battle is always lost for the argument. So this is how we can strengthen national security. We should be more resilient against disinformation. Thank you. And Elżbieta, how do you see it? I am a lawyer, so for me national security means, on the one hand, protecting us people in the Czech Republic using various tools, using the police, the army, and other services. Plus, national security means also that there is the right setup of democracy protection measures, that there is justice to make sure there is peace in society. So this means national security towards the outside, but also within the country. But also national security means something more to me. It means also economic security, and because of AI, this also means that we are sovereign in terms of technology. We have sufficient quantity of technological resources, and we are self-sufficient. This means that when someone cuts the cables that go to other countries, our infrastructure will not collapse. And national security, for me, is also an individual matter, because we are as safe, as mature we are as individuals. This means that we should be able to defend ourselves, we should be able to defend our mental space, as was already mentioned. Emotions often win over arguments. So this is also about our individual work and about our ability to face the outside world, because individuals form a community which should be resilient. Thank you. And Tomáš, your technical point of view, because you are someone who focuses on AI and you have a background in mathematics. I have always had background in technology, so national security has always been grounded in technology. And as I'm getting older, it also means that national security means being protected against external influences, even on social media. I think that Alžběta has already said that our sovereignty is extremely important, and it's not only about having the right algorithms, but also about being able to produce something. Our technology to produce semiconductors date back to the 90s, so we lag behind the rest of the world. There is another aspect to this. National security means that I can move around freely, that my rights are enforceable, and in an ideal society, it means that I don't have to fight for my rights all the time, but just sometimes. Thank you. AI is not only beneficial, its misuse means various threats as well, and these are multiple threats and which are getting more and more sophisticated. AI has increased the possibility of making cybernetic attacks. These are connected vessels. National security, AI, and quantum technology are connected. Various deepfakes are being used in disinformation campaigns. There is social engineering, various frauds, and this creates challenges without precedent, unprecedented challenges for governments, international organizations, and interested entities. So, Tomáš, again, how do you see risks of AI that could threaten national security? Well, historically, my perception of risks have been influenced by Terminator 2, the film that I love. But that's a film, and I think that we don't know what is the full scope of these risks. Social networks, social media are an amazing example. They are amazing because I can chat with my friends, but at the same time, the algorithms, as it has been already mentioned, create bubbles for us, and we are unable to accept other opinions, and we are not immediately confronted with a different opinion. We are not seeing all the risks. I think that the internet maybe will become useless because you will not know who is on the other side. Maybe the website is a fake website, something which has been automatically generated for you with a content that you like, and the internet will keep enclosing you in a bigger and bigger bubble, which is already happening. And at the same time, you will not be able to trust your emails because you will be facing more and more scams, creating scams, well-targeted scams, personalized scams. All that will be easier. And when I look at you, I think most of you will have social media accounts on whichever network, on whichever platform, and this is where you provide your personal data. And you know, data from your credit card is enough for others to know where you buy things and what you do, and all this data could be misused by those who will get hold of this data. And when we discuss AI, I think that most of us know what LLMs are, and I think that you should actually ask yourselves who created the model, because you will actually consume the opinions of the creator of the model, because the model is not a universal creator of truth. That's not true. Language models will just give you the opinions of their creator and will actually shift your opinion to where they want you to be, will really shape your opinion. But at the same time, there are some positive aspects. If I, for example, think of defense, I think we have an absolute lack of penetration testers who test the quality of network security, and I think that we will be able to do this more efficiently using language models, and we will also probably be able to follow disinformation campaigns with higher efficiency, but the social networks go against us because they are owned by international entities which will not provide data to us. And I also wanted to mention one thing, but I forgot what it was. Maybe you'll remember later. And what about Aleš? How do you see the risks?
Well, A.C. Clarke is my favorite author. I have this many books from him. And my most favorite story is about Frankenstein's skull from the collection called 9 Million God's Names. I recommend finding the story. You can download it online. And the story goes like this. There is a mess, blackouts, planes are falling from the sky, cars collapse into each other. And scientists sit in a pub and one of them says, well, maybe that's because we just put the last satellite into orbit. You know, A.C. Clarke is engaged in satellite communication. And it was the last satellite which interconnected all of the satellites and interconnected all telephone centers that we have in the globe. Okay, but how is this related to what is happening? Well, there is a theory of a supracritical number of elements that you can have in a system, and if you have this supracritical number of elements, the system realizes, is aware of itself, so basically becomes intelligent. Okay, but why is this mess here? Well, because now it is intelligent. And that was written back in 1965. And as I follow the developments, for example, the Turing test, where is it? Where are we today in this regard? So I see a huge risk, indeed, as Putin said, about the leader's position. And even Stephen Hawking warned that if something is going to kill civilization, it will be technology and artificial intelligence. Recently, I mentioned this A.C. Clarke's story on LinkedIn, and a couple of people wrote me, well, that's not possible. I'm a generation who experienced breakthrough moments. I remember very old hall computers. Then there were personal computers. At home, I had a phone, which today you wouldn't even know how to control it because there are no buttons. You had to rotate the circle, and then we have mobile phones. And now we have quantum computers and mobile phones. In terms of computing power, are so much more powerful than the whole computers that we had. So how can you say that you wouldn't have one day the supracritical number of elements in one system? We don't know what is the critical number of elements. So I see a huge risk there. And we ourselves are going against this because we are too much reliant on the technologies. Decision making. I decide whether I pass the street or not, depending on whether there is green or red light. But remember, by the way, I also like Terminator. But I would like also to recall movie Die Hard 4, where traffic control was influenced, and then the culprits were able to go and steal. So when I see there's green light, I make sure that also the car sees that it has red light. We are giving our fates to the hands of the technologies. What do you do if you don't know something? Well, you don't go to the library because Google will tell you, Uncle Google will tell you. But is he telling the truth? Well, I teach as in an MBA program, and my students are allowed to use, for their theses, to use artificial intelligence, but they must admit to that, and once they quote something, they must comment on it. Now I have the theses at home and I need to look at them, and one of them, written by a top manager, commented on something that was provided to him by the text model of artificial intelligence, and he explains that what the artificial intelligence says was complete nonsense. It wants to give you a response, and it prefers to fabricate something rather than saying, I don't know. When I asked, who is Aleš Špidla? I wanted to make sure that the whole world knows who I am. And I got a response that I was a politician, Vladimír Špidla, because it is a Czech politician. So the artificial intelligence didn't know, and it instead used this response. So imagine now that you are basing your decisions on information like this. I would be able to talk for hours about this. Thank you. Now, Luděk, what is your take? From the perspective of the Ministry of the Internal Affairs. Well, much has been said already. Personally, I think that as the development goes on, there is a lot of polarization in society and also in technologies. For example, artificial intelligence. On one hand, the technologies really are extremely beneficial. It is amazing, let's admit that. So much information at hand. We made such a huge progress. We are of one generation, so indeed it's incredible that that your phone has so much computing power. But it also brings along extreme risks. Not only if you have blackout, and we had it here in the Czech Republic recently, that suddenly there was no electricity, and it turned out to be a huge problem, and it could really have huge consequences. And also, and really, I know that I am not the youngest generation, I also have to say that I have become dependent. I can find information on Google. I look for it there. It's not just the young people who do that. And recently when my phone was dead and I forgot the PIN code and I was in the city, I wasn't able to even to buy a tram ticket. I didn't know which tram to take. I was lost completely. And so, yeah, this is what I see as a risk. And we should be trying to learn ourselves to live without these technologies and be ready for life if these measures, if this equipment was limited. And from the perspective of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, there is always the problem of possible misuse and how to defend ourselves. The culprit is always in an advantage because he or she decides where, how, at what time. Well, if you are defending yourself, you must have a wide spectrum. You must be ready for a variety of scenarios. So in this regard, I perceive that there is a huge risk, and this is also related now to my former military career. We, and by that I mean also the defense sector of the state, we are tying our hands behind our back actually, and then it's difficult to fight. I remember when we were in Afghanistan, that was really very typical. We were in the disadvantaged situation. The enemies, they could do whatever they wanted, irregardless of any rules. But we, as the coalition forces, we were tied by so many rules. And it was like fighting with someone, but one of your hand is tied behind your back. So my perspective as an officer of the Ministry of Internal Affairs is that we should try to reinstate trust in state institutions, in state authorities, and subsequently to give more tools to the hands of the authorities. But at the same time, and maybe Alžběta will add something to that, we have to make sure that if there is a misuse, there is a very strict response, so that those who would want to commit a misuse know what they are facing. And as we have this game of the thieves and the police must have the tools to defend our society. Thank you. What are the alarming risks according to Alžběta, the risks related to artificial intelligence? Well, there are many, but before that, I would like to maybe go back to the science fiction stories and the movies, because there we really can find quite a lot. But at MIT, there is one major which is about implementing things technologically, things from science fiction movies. So science fiction movies are really an excellent example how to draw inspiration from pop culture. At the same time, a couple of years ago, I was at a university where they have an excellent security research, and there is a unit which watches Black Mirror. I don't know whether you know the series, but it's about the newest technologies, and based on what this series forecast, the new trends in technologies, this unit is preparing the national security strategy based on what you can find in the Black Mirror series. This is, I think, very interesting. Now, as for artificial intelligence, we heard a lot from the legal perspective. There is a lot of pitfalls. But for me personally, the biggest risk is that we will no longer be ourselves. There is this blurring of boundaries between what is real and what is artificially made. Things which are made artificially will be presented to us. You know, it's like you are boiling the frog. First you have it in the cool water, and then you increase the temperature slowly until it is done. And we have these incremental steps. People too often turn to technologies and they stop trusting themselves. And once a human doesn't trust himself, then he or she is easy to manipulate because he doesn't know where is the truth. He loses his compass and he or she is paralyzed. So if you start outsourcing your decisions, if you delegate it to the technologies, then you lose the ability to decide on your own. And once you have paralyzed individuals, then you have paralyzed society. You have people who are no longer able to think for themselves. They don't know what to trust. And that, I think, is the biggest risk, when you lose yourself and lose the capacity to think. But then there is a host of other risks. Well, of course, you must realize who created the intelligence, because you are outsourcing the decisions, but someone has instructed artificial intelligence, someone has trained artificial intelligence specifically. There is a model, and the author or the owner says that it is very much in line with his opinion, and I will not tell you the name. Yes, the systems also have caused several suicides. Some of these models really made people kill themselves. And as for economic security, we must realize that when we use artificial intelligence models from different countries, we are outsourcing our work. It is being done by the company who provides the models from abroad. And at that point, it's getting heated. At that point, we are losing the national economy because we will no longer need that many people, that many employees. And this goes back to the technological sovereignty, which I mentioned. If we are to be replaced by artificial intelligence, let that be our own artificial intelligence. That's a quote I heard and I liked it.
Let me just add, maybe I'm being paranoid, but whenever I ask a model of foreign nationality to help me, I provide the model with information on what I'm working on. So when I write it down in the model, I provide it to the model. That's alarming. I'm saying that I am paranoid, but maybe I'm not. I'm not sure. Just a short response. That's another issue, this paranoia. We don't trust anything anymore, but at the same time we need alliances of societies and nations that trust each other. The Czech Republic will not be able to do this alone. We need international partners, we need support from them, we need AI from them. It's not the Czech Republic against everyone, but we need equal partnerships. But in cybersecurity, we need paranoid people. Because whenever I look at milk in a box, I always see a bug. So you must change your mindset. When you want to start working in cybersecurity, you have to start thinking as a hacker. And you've mentioned a very good word, trust. Even though it might not seem so, classic cybersecurity routers, switchers, computers is based on trust. Because if I buy a device made by Apple, there is a guarantee that it will be implemented using the right regulation. And if I buy a device made by a skillful manufacturer and it costs 10 times less, maybe you know, the price is so low because there is also something else in the device. Okay. I can just confirm that this we have already noticed this tendency because 2 weeks ago the government has approved a new cybersecurity strategy, and there will be a new law which will come into force in November regarding cybersecurity, and this also covers the various risks linked to different manufacturers. So entities, organizations will have to assess their devices in terms of their manufacturers. You must realize that a device is not just the hardware, but any equipment you have. Exactly. Let me just add that with the new US administration, we have learned that we will not receive AI chips, that we will not have access to LLMs. So we will have to create it ourselves. Not the Czech Republic, but the EU. So that we do not use AI from the US or China, but our own AI. But this also presents some risks. Okay, I think that AI is still a technology that keeps evolving, and its use has not been fully understood and described. And further research on the impact of the implementation of AI is more important than ever. Because technology is a double-edged sword and will definitely influence the issues of national security as well. So I'd like to ask you whether the current regulation of AI is necessary, sufficient, and correctly targeted. It's targeted on personal data protection and ethics and corruption. Or will it be necessary to modify this regulation based on further development? And there's an exception within this law which covers security services. This was adopted in 2024. Is it a step in the right direction, or maybe exceptions should not be allowed? Aleš? You definitely studied the European AI Act and our strategy. We often hear that the EU is very good at regulation, but I think that in some areas this regulation is necessary. So Aleš, is the current regulation sufficient or not? Well, first of all, let me share my motto. My friend said that it's not good to quote myself, but I'm happy to do it. So, motto, you know my motto. Cybernetic information security is not a question of laws, but a question of self-preservation. And I think this applies to AI as well. The AI Act, AI regulation on the European level is definitely necessary because with LLMs, there's been a huge problem created, the shadow AI, an unregulated use of AI. My colleague has already mentioned that. Big corporate companies do not allow the use of open models. I don't know if you're aware of that, but do not work for a corporate company because they will not allow you to use open AI. I used to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers. I've already actually worked almost everywhere. So these corporate companies actually have their employees only writing reports. I spent 95% of my energy writing reports. And when you realize that you don't have to spend 14 hours overtime writing report, you can just send it somewhere and it's ready in 5 minutes. And big corporations realize that this should not be allowed because they realized that their employees were sending out technical knowledge, sensitive information, sending it somewhere into a cloud. So regulation is definitely necessary so that gray AI or shadow AI is not being used. Well, there is huge responsible use is highlighted in the AI Act, but this covers only a part of the world. The rest of the world will not care. And you asked about exceptions. This is what my colleague mentioned here. There have been studies published, and I read an article, an excellent article on this topic, a regulation which reduces our ability to defend ourselves. That's that hand that you have tied behind your back. So regulation, to a certain extent, we definitely have to respect international law. We have Tallinn guidelines regarding international war law in cyber space, but that's as if the Institute for the Protection of Trade entered the battlefield saying, stop the battle because you didn't buy the bullets properly in accordance with public procurement law. You can't do that. You can't do that. It's just, I wouldn't want to live in such a country. I think that the exception for security services is a correct exception because big states will not let the EU interfere with their national security. And does the Ministry of Interior think the same? Yes, and Aleš said that corporate companies do not allow their employees to use AI, but the ministry is also a corporate company because we face the same issue. The information we work with are not maybe not secret, but they're sensitive. So it's an issue. We cannot use AI. We cannot just send it to the outside world. So even without regulation, this presents a problem. And let me just repeat that regulation is necessary to a certain extent, but our enemies, state actors, China or Russia or non-state actors, criminals, for example, they are not covered by regulation. They don't care about regulation. So this is to our disadvantage. As our colleague Alžběta said here, if we want to get ahead in Europe and if we want to be self-sufficient, then it's really difficult to do so when everything is heavily regulated. And let me share my own experience because I am in charge of security research. Within the state apparatus and public sector, not only in the Czech Republic. I am not saying that this applies only to the Czech Republic. This applies to all democratic states. These states have many democratic principles in place which slow down the process and build obstacles. These principles go against misuse of public money and against corruption. So these principles are right. But natural principles, natural obstacles, we must have them. But at the same time, when we add further regulation, for example, the AI Act, we might find ourselves, at the back, and we will, be 2 or 3 rounds behind our enemies. And this has already been said, but those who will dominate everything. I'm not saying it will be Russia, maybe a different state. So it should be balanced regulation. And this has already been mentioned several times, and GDPR and personal data protection is being mentioned often. Let me just say that we should just ask ourselves whether this is not a type of obsession, because the majority of people are on social media today. And thanks to all these devices, our private life is on a completely different level compared to 30 or 40 years ago. So maybe we should get used to the fact that our faces and basic information about us are available. We should maybe live with it, and we should not insist on being deleted from all the systems. Maybe we should change our mindset about this. Thank you. Alžběta, as a lawyer, how do you see it? They have been working on an act for 3 years, and then they provide an exception. Well, the AI Act is targeted on what the EU can regulate, and that security exception applies to defense, to the armies, which is beyond the powers of the EU. And regarding the police, there is regulation of bio-monitoring systems in real time, which prevents the police from using systems which would constantly monitor individuals and biometrically assess where an individual is located. This had a huge impact on the police, as far as I know, because, for example, there are monitoring systems at airports, and they had to be switched off because they are not in compliance with this regulation. This can only be approved by a court. So this regulation reflects the setup in society. This was based on political demand. There were many discussions which preceded this, and this is proof that people do not trust security services. That's the reason. If we had more trust in security services, the regulation would have been different. And what are the practical consequences? If we do not allow the use of some technologies, we cannot expect for society to be protected.
And I'm not going to tell you whether this is right or wrong, because of course the Czech Republic has its history of communism. I know it from my family. You know, there was always this like, just make sure you don't tell this anyone. Someone is watching you. Everything will be used against you. So we have this historical memory, and the regulation is a result of all these factors in the society. And the AI Act is the first regulation of AI in the world. It's difficult now to say whether it is going to be right or wrong, because it is now coming into force gradually, and time will show whether this will prove right or whether we will have to revisit it. Sometimes the regulation changes because there is a terrorist attack and you find out that, we were unable to prevent this. So maybe this then can lead to changes in the regulation. Or maybe in some country the technology will be used for watching journalists, so there will have to be even more regulation. Time will show, and we will see whether, as it is designed now, whether it is right or wrong. Tomáš, what about you? Don't you think that the regulation is a hinder to development? Well, regulation is always hindering technological innovations. This is clear. I don't have any strong opinion about that. I think that we should value our privacy. But people, as has been said, seem not to value their privacy. You don't mind that Google knows everything about you? No, it's comfortable. I like that. So, you know, this is the way people react. There's a huge entity that knows everything about you, and people don't mind. So we have a strong legal protection of personal information, but basically people don't care about it, because they will always replace their comfort. They will always exchange comfort for this for privacy. So I think the AI Act will not be sufficient, because we don't know where this is all heading. We never managed to regulate something upfront. Social networks, for example, and the algorithms, it was a total failure. But on the other hand, maybe if they were regulated right from the start, you wouldn't have these algorithms. We as researchers do not have access to this data, that's a fact. We must cope with that. I think it is especially hindering the security research more than the language models. That's a problem. Then there's this question of whether there should be derogation for or an exemption for military, and I think that there were always exemptions for military purposes. For example, if you want to buy weapons, you must have simply the legitimate document for that. It was always like that. But then I think that there should be certainly some type of control. And politicians, even in the past, have been misusing their role or position for their own purposes, like the Prime Minister Nečas, who really harmed the reputation of a high-ranking politician much more than we realize. Recently, there was a Czech PM, a female, who was sending hygienic control to selected companies, but you know, that could really, it sounds like it's benign, but actually it could really destroy your business if you have public health controls every 2 weeks just because one politician wants to destroy your company. That is a problem. And you know, that what we have now is like artificial intelligence 0.1. It is still predictable. It is still very simple. But once we are going to have artificial intelligence to 0, then you can just connect it once to the internet and it will be, and everything will be over, really, because it will copy itself. It will be much more intelligent than us. It will be much more able to predict what we are going to do. It will just replicate itself, and the question is whether we can prevent this by any sort of regulation, because once you have an armed conflict, then, you know, regulation doesn't matter. You can just take the Ukraine case. One side uses biological weapons or chemical weapons. Then you have the use of mines, landmines, and states which are neighboring countries to Russia also start to abandon some of the regulations which were banning the use of these weapons. Thank you. Thank you. I believe we can agree that the technologies of artificial intelligence should be a part of national security, but to know which means we need, we must find out also what is the global situation of our competition. We should be watching how artificial intelligence systems are being used and misused, and for that we need to have some kind of system that would analyze and evaluate these things. Who, according to you, should be doing this for the state? There are countries where there are special agencies doing these tasks. There are, in other countries, there are governmental institutions. And what could be the role of your respective institutions? Who, apart from the Ministry of the Economy and Trade, which is the coordinator, should be responsible for the development and implementation of these means for the national security? Is it going to be just the state envoy, which has been recently established? So, what do you think, Aleš? Is it enough just to take information from partners and or do we say then to Luděk to have a research project and someone else will do it for the state? What is your take? Well, when it comes to some certification of systems using artificial intelligence, I am a skeptic. One of my students paid a course of practical use of artificial intelligence. It was last fall. Then she went again to this course half a year later, and she found out that it was completely different, although it was the same course. So when it comes for the control, we need to have some methodology which would reflect the situation as it is now. But the systems with artificial intelligence are like this. In half a year's time, the methodology will no longer be sufficient. So the methodology will have to be so general that it is able to encapture also the possible future. But if it's going to be too general, then it is going to be powerless. So, because I am also an envoy at our university, and I am skeptical simply to these things. Let us try to ask the artificial intelligence maybe to create the methodology based on the knowledge of its own level. I have to admit, because I also create new study programs at the Severo Institute. Now, the chief AI officer someone who was able to implement and develop artificial intelligence in any institution. So I wrote it down, I made a diagram and I used a language model, and the task was create a study program, Chief AI Officer. And it took me 2 hours, while the artificial intelligence had a very similar result in few minutes times or a few seconds, within a few seconds. So you can task the artificial intelligence to design a regulation of itself. Okay. Many years ago in the UK, there was a rule that each new piece of legislation has to be scanned by artificial intelligence, because they have common law, whether it is not in contrast to another piece of legislation, etc. So maybe this way lawyers would have more time for other things if the artificial intelligence cleaned up our legislation. We have 8,000 pieces of legislation or more. I think we have 50,000 pieces of legislation. Okay, but you also include decrees, etc., don't you? Well, yes, maybe. I'm not sure now. I'm not sure. Well, anyway, still a big number. And if we, I'm just afraid that if we task artificial intelligence with this task, she will get mad. Yeah, but at the moment we would need a special legal language model. Okay. Now recently I saw low AI. Okay, law and low AI. This is my this is my long-term opinion, that when you have these technologies which develop too quickly, it is really difficult to regulate. It was not that difficult to regulate traffic because there is not that much development, but with artificial intelligence it's really tricky. Now, Luděk, what about your ministry? Is there any regulation in the pipeline? Well, our specific department, already in 2021, as a part of one of our programs, we held a competition for the application of artificial intelligence. There were 15 or 20 different projects, and about 2 years back, a work or task force was established at our ministry. And today, there was a lot of enthusiasm at the beginning, but now it is fading because we are, of course, encountering a number of problems, some of which have been mentioned here, be it the European regulation and also other things. Personally, I am convinced, you mentioned national security. National security will primarily be about the Ministry of the Interior and the Ministry of Defense. These two entities have quite different approaches. And when it comes to AI, it is very visible. There are exceptions for the army, but not for law enforcement agencies. So it's quite problematic then to manage this as a whole, because these two entities have a diverse approach to it. And another thing is, because nowadays we have a new concept of security research which is being approved. So we had a lot of discussion about it, and artificial intelligence is not explicitly mentioned there as a goal in itself. Today, the use of AI will anyway be something natural. It will be naturally a part of some decision-making processes. But mostly, the process of all these projects within the state are very lengthy. In spring, to give you an example, in spring we had we opened a competition, and it takes about half a year before the process gets through. And then when you have other processes which last 3-4 years, then it's already getting difficult. If you launch a project involving artificial intelligence or related to artificial intelligence, in 4 years' time the conditions will be different, and the rules will no longer be relevant for the research projects for within the state, because there is quite there are complex legal processes, and indeed this is a problem.
Well, you know, AI is evolving. New versions are coming up constantly. So the state currently finds it really difficult to respond to this. That's a huge problem. It's also a challenge for us. We should be able to deal with this because, as I said, in the end, we will stay behind in this struggle. And this is not sustainable, because when something is approved today, a project is approved today, you have to maintain its current state for 5 years. But imagine how AI will evolve over 5 years. I have already submitted some projects for technology, security technology, and I know how quickly this evolves. And before the project is approved, technology makes huge advances. So how can we adapt to this? Shall we create partnerships with other countries? Or let's look at the market and buy whatever is available? What do you think, Elżbieta? I think that we already have the tools available, because every institution today monitors what is happening in AI. And I think what we need now to make sure we are safe is to have good information exchange. So all bodies, all institutions should meet, their experts should meet and exchange information. And in terms of international partnerships, we already have that. There is Interpol. The police exchanges information within Interpol. There is also a committee for AI. So I think that what is most important for us is to build internal information exchange networks and be proactive. For example, have a dedicated server where all the information will be available and assessed. And alerts will be sent to all participating institutions. For example, we have red flagging for dangerous goods. Then this can be also used for this information. There is the National Institute for Cyber Security, and it plays a big role in this. So we should enhance information exchange. And as my colleague said, there should be some exceptions regarding AI in terms of projects and public procurements, because in this area we lack action. We should be actionable. We should be able to act quickly in this area, because technologies evolve quickly as well, and we should provide for exceptions in this area. There should be control, obviously, checks That's necessary, but we should be more flexible. Small countries which do not have such rigid regulation have a big advantage because there is a group of people who know each other. They can agree on things quickly. They award a public procurement and everything happens really fast. So there are small states, I will not give you any names, but small names that act quickly. So we should be able to act. We should be able to find the right balance. Thank you. Tomáš, you take part in various international projects. So when you do the comparison with other countries, where do we stand? I agree with Alžběta. We actively monitor the development of AI. We try to find out how the various versions work. ChatGPT 3 and 5. There is not much difference between them. The underlying technology is the same. It dates back to 2017. So I think that we know what this is about, and I think it's up to the universities, professors, researchers to this, and let me showcase our work here. We manage to speak at the most prestigious conferences, so we know what is the current state of the art. And I also agree with Alžběta that there is a lack of information exchange. Our information is not shared with anyone. We keep it inside our building. Sometimes it's shared with students. Sometimes we meet at a national conference, and these conferences do not make sense at all. At these conferences, you maybe meet someone from the public, that's it. Maybe we could set up a forum. I don't think that people will respond to alerts that they receive in their inbox because I delete those automatically. And I prefer personal contact. We could meet once every 6 months, do a few panels and have a chat. And at the same time, I think we have communication means. We have the technology agency and the grant agency in the Czech Republic, which award projects and should also assess them. I think that that should be the information flow of the government. And this is where we fail. We don't have skillful program managers. I just send out a report and that's it. And the most important thing about the grant is to be successful, because if you do not meet all the conditions of the grant, you will never receive another grant from the agency, which means that when I write an application for the subsidy, for the grant, I must write it to be able to comply with all the conditions. So I write it about something that I know that works, or I have to find some workarounds, you know, because you never know what's going to happen in 3 years' time. I never know what I'm going to do today or tomorrow, you know. When I walk my dog in the morning, I come up with an idea and think, you know, oh, this is a really nice problem. What people do and how do people, what do people do about that, you know, and I walk my dog quite often, so I come up with ideas quite often. So I try to find some workarounds when I prepare applications for grants. Now I am revealing my strategy to MPs. And when you apply for a subsidy, you have to know 3 years in advance how much money you will spend on people, on traveling, on equipment. This means that when the first year of the project you buy a laptop, you cannot buy a new one the following year if your laptop breaks down, you know? And I was lucky to study in the US, and thanks to my contacts, I received subsidies from the American Air Force, and there it worked differently. I wrote down a 2-page project. You know, it's quite easy to apply for a project here with the Czech grant agency. You know, it's not that demanding. You just describe state of the art on 10 pages, but then what happens with the project? Because when I wrote 2 pages, 2-page application for US Air Force, that was okay, very easy. And then during the whole duration of the project, I was in touch with the manager. He was quite active. He was happy to visit me in Prague, in Oxford, and he came, asked me, so how is it going, and what are your results, show it to me, you know. So, and this is what we lack here. The Czech grant agency is like a black hole. They distribute money and then they don't care what happens next. Let me give you another example. I have a friend who works for a company in the US which develops technologies for patents. They kept coming up with new things, and they had 2 patent lawyers there who kept regularly visiting individual departments. They had lunch with the people there or coffee, and their only task was to talk to developers and ask them what they have developed and what could be patented. And I have never seen a similar thing elsewhere. I used to work for Avast and Cisco, and this is quite unique. So I think that we are not skilled enough in implementation. We have all the frameworks and all that, but we are not skilled enough in practice. So we are nearing the end of our panel. Let me just say that we also have a national strategy based on 7 basic objectives, and among these objectives we have education and expertise in AI and research and innovation. And I think that it's good that this was included. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think about these priorities and how can we implement these objectives? But I think it would take too much time to discuss this question. So let me wrap it up with a different question. We have already discussed this partially before. When and how will the general intelligence come about? Let me give you a hint. Jensen Haug, the boss of NVIDIA, said in March 2024 that the general intelligence would come to existence within 5 years, so before 2030. So then we will just connect it to the internet and it will do everything for us. Do you think that it's realistic that it will be created before 2030? General intelligence which will make its own decisions and will have cognitive abilities. I am unable to guess here because there are many contradicting opinions from experts. I am not a technology expert, I'm just a lawyer. But if there is general intelligence, we must all be ready to be the strong element in the chain. So we should not look at the general intelligence, at what it's doing, but we should look inside ourselves and build our own resilience, individual resilience.
What about you, Thomas? Well, I think it will not be by 2030. We will be scaling up the technologies from 2017, but I think we are still missing something. I don't know what that something is, but the way we are doing it now, I think we will not yet be there. And could I just shortly about the education, regarding education? Yes, go ahead. Yes, I wanted to mention education, and I would like to target the younger audience. I believe that the existing artificial intelligence has a huge potential to make education accessible in a fairer way. So there will be a fair approach to education. I am annoyed of the nowadays system when you want to go to a high school and you have to file an application. In my case, it was sheer luck, and it was really just a race. How much money are your parents going to pay for preparing you for the entrance examinations? And we do have, thanks to artificial intelligence, now a tool to be against this unfairness. When I teach young people, what you really need is to be patient. You need to find out in which way you need to explain it to the student, because everybody has different ways of understanding and absorbing the material. But eventually, everybody understands it, but you need time and patience to explain things. And if this could be well implemented, then AI could be a fantastic tool to level out this unfairness, because it could keep explaining things to students. Aleš, what about the year 2030? Well, I will not mention what will be happening to my body by that time, but what will be happening to the artificial intelligence, I don't dare to judge, but permit me to say a few quotes. Mr. Hinton, who is the Nobel Prize laureate, this year in his speech said that once the artificial intelligence will be able to do it, it will first of all get control of its switch button, simply to ensure that we cannot switch it off. There were some experiments this spring, like the AI was tasked to make some operation and then switch itself off. And in several cases, the artificial intelligence managed to make its way around and simply avoid switching itself off. And then another quote from a conference Mikulov: we have Paleolithic emotions, Middle Age institutions, and godly technology, and now try to make something out of it. So indeed, I will hardly be able to tell you what we will have in 2030. I can maybe just tell you what will be the age of my 6 grandchildren, but maybe there are going to be 8 grandchildren by that time, but really hard to say. It's just like the Turing test, when the predictions were projected even further, but you don't even know anymore whether the response was given by a human or a technology. So, really hard. Luděk, what is your take? Well, I don't dare neither. 3 or 4 years ago, I always used to say that AI is a tool and it will always depend on how you use it. So I was rather skeptical about the generative AI. But now I don't say that anymore. Really hard to give some estimation. I don't even know how to understand this term. It could be great, and it could really be quite of a problem. So I would join Alžběta in saying that we humans should try to educate ourselves, try to have as many own knowledge as we can have, And, as my colleague said, speak more in the real world to each other, physically. Let us not just be chatting to each other, because this is related. And when it comes to education, artificial intelligence really does bring huge challenges. And for the future, we will have to revisit how we teach and how we examine. The way we work, the way we prepare tests today will no longer be relevant, and we should go back to real discussion, forming of arguments, real encounter with humans, and we should trust each other more and trust our own capabilities to do decision making and simply not just delegate everything to the technology. I would like just to comment on the teacher example, teachers being replaced by AI. I saw a joke. A horse is asking a farmer, you mean I will be replaced by a tractor? No, you will be replaced by a horse which is able to drive a tractor. I'd like to mention that one of the big dangers pointed out by many scientists is that we humans will simply no longer be needed. Artificial intelligence will be doing its business, it will be doing its things, and we will be, just drinking coffee, but we will be basically useless. We would be cleaning the ventilation equipment. I want to say one more thing. People will always be needed because us humans are deciding what is needed. The artificial intelligence can do whatever it wants, but when I go to the forest, I go there and I decide what is the sense of the meaning of my life. Well, if there will be a forest. Well, please, let's try to end on a positive note. Okay. We have arrived to the end of our discussion, and I would like to say thank you to all of you who have been here with us, and hopefully you will join me in thanking our panelists for very useful. Oh, we have a question from Mr. Žáček. Well, I will not respond to the grand criticism. I do agree that the bureaucracy which comes with state money is really too much, but I don't know what to do about that. But I have one question to our young future. So, you said there is a lack of trust to police and the law enforcement agency because of our historical experience, and that's why we overregulate them. Well, but then look at China, where you have an extreme opposite, where the police can watch people everywhere. So what to do? You have a system here. We will be regulating it. We will be able to what should we do? Because they will be using it against us. And now as for the young generation, all of you have mobile phones and social media. All of you have various smart devices that you are using Chinese servers, capturing information about where you were jogging this morning. And they know more about you than your parents. So what does it mean? That somewhere in a totalitarian country they have all this data stored. What does this mean for the future of these young people here? Whenever you go abroad, they will know everything about you. In the past, when the secret police was watching you, it was really difficult to know everything about you. They had to be physically present. But now you have your phone. It tells everything about you. And on top of that, you feed the social media. So what does this mean from your point of view? That, we make some regulation. We will be protecting our personal data. We will be using all sorts of tools. But abroad, outside the EU, you have states like China and Russia to a limited extent, which have the technologies that do collect all this data. The data that cannot be collected here are collected there. How is this going to endanger our young students, future diplomats, future ministers, future experts who will be traveling abroad? China? What do you think? How is China going to use this data? Well, social scoring has been around in China for many years already. You criticize the regime and your children will not be accepted to school. Really, they have an almost perfect system of watching people. There was one example when they were watching people in a factory. They created caps like an encephalograph, and they were monitoring the workers. They were monitoring their level of enthusiasm with which they were doing their job, operating the machines. And all of that was being processed within this social scoring. I like this question. Indeed, you have the smart watch monitoring your heart rate. And when you watch a screen, and this is called neuromarketing, they are able to see what made your heart rate faster. And they know where were you, what was on the screen, and they could use it for marketing to provide you with advertisements which is interesting for you. I bought a furnace for my grandmother, and now I still see an advertisement for furnaces. So this is still very imperfect. And combining of this information from all devices, from all these wearables, mobile phones and computers, even smart hoovers, all of this sends information to China, smart fridges. So you have at home more computers than you have persons in your household, and each of these devices can send information. In my study program called Management and Cybersecurity, we had one programmer of smart cars from the Škoda company. Do you know how many lines of programs you have in a car? It's about 7.5 million lines of the source code. And soon there's going to be even 100 times more. And if you think that between 2 to 5% of these lines are wrong, then think how many mistakes there will be and where all this information then is going to be sent, and who, sending information about how you drive, where you are, etc. And all of that is information, the most valuable thing. Your information, which is your currency. This is the currency by which you pay for the relatively cheap phones and wearables. And if on top of that you deploy artificial intelligence, then you have such profiles and you can do so many things with them that you don't even know how much can you be manipulated. So be careful, and do keep your fates in your hands, and do keep talking to each other.
Alžběta will have to go, so please start and then I will add my comment. Just briefly, you are right. We have regulation and other countries do not have regulation, which maybe means that this information should be provided to security services so that they can assess the vulnerability of individuals when they go abroad. But this is our life, this is our setup. We protect privacy. But as Tomáš said at the beginning, people themselves are not aware that they are sharing their personal data because it's because it's comfortable for them. So we must actually raise awareness about this. We must tell them how dangerous is this sharing of personal data. So today you're just, okay, I am using navigation, who will do what to me because of that? No one can do anything to me. So we must let people know that it's dangerous. And if you post something on TikTok, maybe one day someone will blackmail you because of your past videos. And if you keep using your navigation, someone can follow you and maybe, you know, take your child. And so this is actually, we share this information ourselves. China has social credit, and we must just stress how important is our own privacy. I think that we've definitely done something illegal in the past, and I did things in the past that I am ashamed of, and I'm happy that it was during analog times, because there are some photos that I would not want to be shared publicly. But in general, people think that science prospers in open societies, because whenever you start controlling science, you know, asking, is this right wing enough? Is this left wing enough? Is this woke enough? Can I say this? Can I or not? You know, then everything goes downhill with science. And I'd like to know what's going to happen in China, because I think that when we're closed down, we are going back in time. When I was born, we really were not that important on international scene in terms of science. So maybe we are going back to that time. So I'd like to wrap it up, but there's a question. I am Petr Rendek. I am from the platform of the European Memory and Conscience. I really like this session. We are talking about Cold War and analog times, and we must say that the West won. The East, Moscow, Kremlin, and allies who conducted many operations in Czechoslovakia against the free world. Still, the free world won, even in terms of technology. Chris Miller described the development of computer technologies from the Cold War up until today, says that the Soviets didn't develop their own semiconductor and chip technology, but they started to steal technology. But with the digital era and the internet, the digital information war came. And what's important to me is China has been around since forever and is gaining information from the free world. Because in the past, Czechoslovakia used to send scientists to the free world to gain knowledge and bring it back to Czechoslovakia. This is what China has been doing continuously. And we have documents documenting this in our archives. Even from the past, we have documents saying that there were thousands of students from China studying in the US, gaining knowledge, and then they take it back to their authoritarian country. But Microsoft and other big companies of the free world are offering their know-how, and they are doing it to be able to control the regimes. Well, I have a question. It was mentioned at the beginning. What about Europe? Us, the Czech Republic, and the free world? What is our advantage? Are we ahead enough compared to China, which is misusing our technologies? Not only in terms of human capital, but also AI uses computers, hardwares, computer power, various networks. This is what AI uses. But according to Christopher Miller, top-notch technologies are produced in Taiwan by Europe and the US. And Taiwan is threatened. If I were the American army, and if I invade Taiwan, I would bomb the factories. If this is your question. I think that at this moment we are still ahead in terms of microprocessor manufacturing, but you said we have Chinese students here. And 20 years ago, when I was studying in the States, there were Chinese students everywhere. That's a risk, a national risk. And this can also present a threat for the Chinese regime, because what Chinese students are seeing is that it's not that bad in the West. So my opinion is to, be, just see them as a risk, but we are showing them that we live in democracy. I would like to follow up on this, on the topic of security and privacy, because I'm not sure whether you noticed this, because Czech media don't talk about it much. But I think that the European Parliament will decide in October or in November about the Czech control law. Social media and text and email services will be forced to check messages and emails using AI, check whether the content is not dangerous. Maybe this might be a danger for our privacy and security, because these will be private AI systems and they will know everything about our conversations online. You mean checking the end-to-end the systems that use end-to-end encryption, such as Messenger or WhatsApp? It's a double-edged sword, that's for sure. Because primarily the Czech should focus on fighting child pornography. So this is often being used by people who share pornography, because these channels use end-to-end encryption, so it cannot be spied on. But it's a double-edged sword, as I said. Because even if you develop technologies which will be managed by security services, which should monitor child pornography, it can always be misused. The tools can be leaked. Someone will leak them on purpose, even though it's not easy. And a Danish or a Dutch parliament presented this in the parliament, but I think it will be approved. Many member states will be against it, and I don't think it will be approved as it is today. Either it won't be approved at all, or it will be strictly regulated. It will have to be ordered or mandated by court. There will be many more parameters which would have to be met. This is a sensitive topic which has been discussed for almost 7 years. When Great Britain was still a member of the EU, they came to see us and it was their idea, and they pressured us to accept this, that it would help police officers fighting child pornography, and at the same time it was part of a different law. Tomáš, I would be very careful regarding these technologies, and I would say no, for many reasons. There are always workarounds, and it's always quite easy to do the workaround, and people who spread child pornography will be the first ones who will install these technologies. And I did my PhD in steganography. It's quite an obscure discipline. It means that you have a message and you don't want anyone to read it, so you store it in a medium, for example an image. The image doesn't change, but it contains the secret message. So this technology introduced by an MP doesn't make sense, because it's quite easy to write 1 or 5 lines of code which will encrypt your secret message into an image. I think that the technology, the idea is good, but reality is completely different. And I would have a problem using a technology which is actually being monitored by the state, because, as I said, unfortunately, there are many examples from our history that our politicians often do not respect the rules of the game. And this discussion has been around since the 90s. In the 90s, they already discussed whether encryption should be used. And I think that the Windows 95 was sold in 2 versions, one for the US market and the other for the rest of the world, which had degraded encryption to 56 bits. And the argument was roughly the same, that we need access and we need to be able to read encrypted messages. And for society in general, it's always better for citizens to preserve their privacy. There are many examples. Maybe you've heard about the Tor networks. Its development has been paid by the NSA. It's really anonymous, but only if you do not own 2 servers between the sender and the receivers. And we don't know how many servers are run by the NSA, which developed this network. So I would be very careful, and I would be against it, 100% against it. We prepared an opinion for the negotiations in the EU, and I agree with my colleague here, and I know that companies refused to de-encrypt communication between criminals in the US, and I agree that the communication secret can be breached in some cases when it's ordered by the court, but this is like a blanket order to breach personal privacy. It's like opening all letters at a post office, and I don't think it will be approved like this.
Já bych ještě rád navázal na to téma, které tady otevřel Pavel Žáček s těmi informacemi.
I would like to go back to the topic opened by Mr. Žáček about the information being sent to China. In this regard, I think prevention has been overlooked and the education of people as to what technologies are capable of. We are surrounded by technologies. It's difficult to avoid them, but I think that it is not that endless and that we are not that powerless. Under the previous regime, I was growing up in a dissident family. We were watched by the secret police. They had the technology they had was ridiculous, but they were successful when people didn't know how to defend themselves. So they were able to eavesdrop on people in their homes, etc. But for example, people knew that when they wanted to be really protected, they went to a forest, for example, and they could speak in the forest to each other, or simply there were ways of being careful. And although the technologies are on a completely different level, still we should be aware that some features could be switched off, and you don't have to provide all the information. And if there was more education in this, maybe some grants could be used for that, it could be useful. Yes, you're right. Recently I wrote an article about the level of cybersecurity of the general public, because this is the cyber information security, and it is really related to that. I put this into a parallel with civil defense. We have trained at school what to do if there is an airborne attack. And here I would bombard really I would bomb the Ministry of Education, which really does not want to move forward. I tried to change things, but it is completely hopeless. To create educational programs which would start at kindergartens, simply to twitch the education program so that it is adequate for the youngest children, that will be necessary. It's like the digital furnace. You should know that if you touch it, it's so hot that it will hurt you. And parents should be really afraid of what their son is downloading and what their daughter is uploading. Even parents should be involved. And as Mr. Fulton said yesterday, exercises should also be made. Are any schools today doing exercises as to what to do if there is information leakage about the pupils? These are personal data of a special category. The schools don't even know they have this data. So I really do agree, and this is a role for the education sector, functional education, which according to one thesis this is a very important prevention of a war conflict, because cyber attacks, I mentioned it in one epilogue, that before a soldier comes to a territory, the hacker comes first. They make use of our vulnerabilities in cybersecurity, weakness of the children, weaknesses of the seniors, misuse of computer. According to the Tallinn manual, a hacker is a legitimate target of an attack. But how do you know whether your computer is not a part of a botnet? because then your computer could end up being targeted by a rocket. And that's why you need to learn, learn, and learn. I am 68 years old and I'm still learning because I am aware of the danger posed by this world. And without information, without being informed, I wouldn't be able to defend myself. And I am the age category of those who spread chainmails, by the way. Pavel Žáček mentioned China. Aleš says what we should do. Well, I'd like to mention that China has a project according to which children already at age 6 are being educated about artificial intelligence, and the goal is that by 2030 the whole Chinese population will be literate in the area of artificial intelligence. Maybe in some areas we could take lessons from the Chinese. But now I'd like to conclude on a positive note. We spoke now about the risks more than we spoke about the benefits. And I think that the young generation, it will be up to the young generation because we old tend to be skeptical. Thank you to all of you that you came here. I'd like to thank the panelists because I think that their opinions and discussion was not only interesting but also very useful. Thank you.
Já se s dovolením se přidám. Uzavřel bych ty 2 dny.
I would like to conclude these 2 days by saying thank you to all speakers. I believe, also from my perspective, that I'll be able to follow up on this because this is a never-ending story. There are developments ongoing, and I'm very happy we have young generation here because this will be about you, and you have to keep your eyes opened. And if you do that, then this could be a safer place. So thank you, and see you at another conference next time. Thank you.
Alešku, moc děkuju.
Já děkuji za pozvání, bylo to hrozně fajn.
Děkuju. Tak to